to see you all here. Before we start, I need to read out an announcement about the safety of the building. The building fire alarm signal is a continuous two-tone alarm. On hearing the evacuation alarm, leave the building by the nearest marked exit, right behind me, I should think. Follow the green signs to the assembly point, large staff car park opposite the entrance to the building. Anyone who cannot use the stairs, if necessary, will be helped by the officers present after other people have left. Do not return to the building until told it is safe to do so by an authorised officer. The whole of the council site is a no smoking area. Filming from the public gallery is permitted, but members must please refrain from filming within the council chamber so as not to distract the meeting. Mobile phones must be switched off, please, or switched to silent. Thank you very much indeed. Let me introduce the people we have. We have Mr. John Bryant, who's the officer from the, I've forgotten what he's called now.
Licensing team, Chair.
From the licensing team, chief officer from the licensing team. We have Mr. Paul Vickers, who's our solicitor for giving us information on the legalities of the thing. You have Councillor Matthew Cornish and Councillor Knight. My name is Councillor John DeBell, and I'm the chairman of this meeting. And thank you and welcome you all for coming. From at the very start of the meeting, we need to receive apologies for absence, which we have none, so that's that dealt with. And I need to receive declarations of interest from members in respect of any matter on the agenda, and we have none. So we can proceed. I need also to, we need to vote on the minutes of the previous two meetings. I shall take them both together. I was at one and I was not at the other. Is there anything that you would like to raise on those minutes?
Oh, the meeting.
It's not relevant to us today, and therefore we will accept those minutes. That's absolutely fine. We have before us today, here we go. I'm just checking my notes. Please forgive me. An application to vary a premises licence under the Licensing Act for 2003, and the considerations that we must take into account are primary. The objectives are the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, the prevention of public nuisance, and the protection of children from harm, and that is exactly what we should do. We just follow my notes through. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Mr. John Bryant, who's going to outline the application for us.
Thank you, Chair. Panel, the report before the committee today is, as the Chair has said, is to determine an application to vary a premises licence. In summary, an application pursuant to Section 34 of the Licensing Act 2003 has been made by Mr. Thorpe on behalf of ACSC Services Limited to vary a premises licence at Anstey Village Centre in the recreation ground, Deeks Lane, Anstey. Representations against the application have been made by three interested parties on the grounds of prevention of a public nuisance. Therefore, the committee are asked to determine this application in accordance with the Licensing Act of 2003, the Mid Sussex District Council licensing policy, and the Home Office guidance issued under Section 182 of the Licensing Act 2003, whilst having due regard to the applicant's submissions and the relevant representations. ACSC Services is the trading subsidiary of Anstey Sports and Social Club. They were granted a premises licence by the Licensing Committee on the 24th of April 2021. Sports and Social Club have operated on the site as a members club prior to the Second World War and provides an umbrella for sporting clubs and sections. On the completion of the new clubhouse and facilities, the club applied for and was granted a premises licence. I have set out the current licensable activities and the timings for the panel. I don't propose to go over them again, as there isn't, the application isn't for a change of the core times for those activities. Also appended to the report is the full details of the conditions which were imposed by the committee on hearing the application for the premises licence last year. That is at Appendix C. I've detailed them briefly in the body of the report, but I would draw the panel's attention in particular to condition number 5 in Appendix C, which is on page 53, which I've highlighted, which is a particular condition which this application looks to vary. As stated, these conditions were added to the premises licence by the committee on the determination of the initial application for the premises licence. It should be noted that ASCS did lodge an appeal with the Magistrates' Court in respect of the condition I've highlighted, which was imposed by the committee that the outside areas could not be used after 2100 hours. The original premises licence application had requested the use of these areas until 2200 hours, and the appeal is in respect of this condition. The licensing team have advised that ACSC have paused the appeal, and on the 3rd of May 2022 they submitted an application to vary the current premises licence. Obviously, if they were successful in varying the premises licence, there would be no need to continue with the appeal process within the Magistrates' Court. So this application before the panel at the moment is to allow the use of the outside and balcony areas for licensable activities to 2200 hours, and also to permit the playing of amplified music up to midnight inside the premises on 12 days a year, which would correspond with the non-standard timings for the supply of alcohol, which is currently on the licence and detailed at section 7 of the main report. Now, 3 representations have been received from members of the public, which are referred to as interested parties within the Act. The main points raised in the representations that are relevant relate to the licensing objective of the prevention of a public nuisance, and these representations have not been resolved. It should be noted that the Environmental Protection Team responded to the consultation, not making representations, but pointing out that they note that there was a licensing subcommittee that determined the previous application and imposed a 2100 hours curfew for the balcony and outside areas. This was over 12 months ago, and in the opinion of the Environmental Protection Team member, that is sufficient time to assess the situation. According to their records, they have had no noise complaints since then. They did receive an email from Mr. Thorpe at the start of February 2022, advising that a live music event that they had the week before had generated a number of complaints. This suggests that residents can clearly be affected by noise from the premises. However, this was not noise from outside or balcony activities, and the fact that Mr. Thorpe wrote to them for advice on this matter suggests a responsible attitude and a genuine desire to get things right. They concluded by saying, taking all of the above into consideration, they do not object to the application for 2200 hours for the outside balcony areas, but they do strongly recommend that if granted, the applicant is reminded that any complaints about noise could result in a noise abatement notice or the premises licence being called in for review. The application was correctly advertised on site and in the Mid-Sussex Times. Mr. Thorpe has made further submissions in support of the application, and these are attached to the report for the members of the panel at Appendix 2, and they detail the measures put in place by the club to mitigate public nuisance caused by noise and the recording of complaints and actions taken by the club. The representations. The interested parties' representations. Now, the full representations are appended to the report, and I have summarised in the main report their main points, and I will point out towards the end and direct the panel to the particular representations in full. Emma Sparham has made objections on the grounds of prevention of public nuisance. She has stated that she lives directly opposite the village centre, and the requested changes have a direct impact on her family and neighbours. She references the committee decision letter on the grant of the licence, and further states that the matters raised by the panel are still valid, and makes the following points. 1, noise does travel, especially during the evening hours, when traffic using the main road, the Cookfield Road, dies down. The village centre is surrounded by houses with children of all ages, from babies to ones taking exams. Therefore, it is essential and respectful that residents are not disturbed. And 3, in summer months, windows are open for ventilation, and the bedrooms of her house, her and her daughters, directly face the village centre. She feels that a change of curfew times may restrict her in opening these windows with a fear of noise disturbance late at night, and she knows this will be the same for her neighbours as they have bedrooms in the same position in their houses. She states, with regard to complaints regarding lack or no complaints about noise, she says that the surrounding neighbours and John Thorpe have a WhatsApp group to highlight any disturbances. To date, this has worked, and on past occasions, action has been taken, but this, of course, was after myself, my daughter and my neighbours were disturbed. To say that they have not received any complaints is confusing, especially regarding amplified music, where on one occasion the music, brackets DJ, was so loud it could be heard through the double-glazed windows. There's further comments made in the representation, and in conclusion she states, my request is for you to seriously consider not accepting this variation to the premises licence for Anstey Village Centre, for the curfew to be increased for the balcony to 2200 hours and amplified music till midnight. The residents went through this process only a year ago, which resulted in a reasonable outcome for all parties. To have to again revisit this matter is very disheartening, especially when we keep hearing that the Village Hall Committee has its residents' interests foremost in their minds. The second representation was from Karen Sedgwick-Smith. Again, the objections are on the grounds of prevention of a public nuisance. She states that she wishes to object to the extension of the use of the outside area from 2100 hours to 2200 hours. She details that she lives in very close proximity to the club on a couple of occasions. I and her neighbours have had to complain to request that the music be turned down on the WhatsApp group that was set up between the neighbours and the club. Conversations held outside the village hall travel very clearly to the residents, and with the addition of loud music, the noise becomes terribly invasive and permeates the homes nearby. To extend the balcony times would only increase more noise disturbance for immediate neighbours, and she talks about the comparison made between Anstey Social Club and East Grinstead Social Club, which the members would have seen when they read through the application and the papers. And she makes the point that she believes there's no comparison to be made, as the houses in Anstey are much closer to the club. In conclusion, she says, so I would object to the variation. We have a fair amount of noise disturbance, and I feel it'd be unfair on the surrounding houses for there to be more disturbance. Joanna Stedman has made objections on the grounds of the prevention of public nuisance. She stated that she complained to me directly via email twice last year, in July and October, about noise from the club, when doors were left open and they had a live band, and from people making noise at the balcony at 9:30 in the evening. She states, I'm aware of neighbours commenting to the club about noise on the WhatsApp group that was set up to enable us to report issues. The applicant has representation on the WhatsApp group, and she is surprised given this while they're seeking to review the licence in this way. She goes on to state that the open elevated position in combination with its proximity to neighbouring residential dwellings means a noise from the balcony, even from just opening doors, carries and is a nuisance disturbance to the neighbouring residential properties, which include a number of family homes with young children. And she states this impacts on the amenity of nearby residents by virtue of noise and disturbance. Now, for the panel, I've set out the policy context that Section 35 of the Licensing Act 2003 deals with the determination of the application. The law is set out there, and obviously if you have any questions in respect of that, you have Mr Vickers to provide the relevant advice. At point 19, with regard to relevant representations, the Licensing Act 2003 requires representations to address the 4 licensing objectives, which are the prevention of crime and disorder, the promotion of public safety, the prevention of public nuisance, and the prevention of harm coming to children and young persons. A representation is a relevant representation if it is about the likely effect of the grant of the variation of the licence on the promotion of the licensing objectives. The objector must establish that such a consequence is a likely effect on the grant, i.e. more probable than not. The panel will be well aware of the guidance issued under Section 182 of the Licensing Act. I have copied and highlighted various sections which the panel may well feel relevant to this application. In 9.3, it details that where a representation concerning the licensing objectives is made by a responsible authority or by another person, the licensing authority's discretion will be engaged. Relevant representations can be made in opposition to or in support of an application and can be made by an individual body or business that has grounds to do so. It repeats that a representation is relevant if it relates to the likely effect of the grant of the licence on the promotion of at least one of the licensing objectives, and then gives an example, and it details, in other words, representations should relate to the impact of licensable activities carried on from the premises on the objectives. As a matter of practice, licensing authorities should seek to focus the hearing on the steps considered appropriate to promote the particular licensing objective or objectives that have given rise to the specific representation and avoid straying into undisputed areas. A responsible authority or other person may choose to rely on their written representation. They may not add further representations to those disclosed to the applicant prior to the hearing, but they may expand on their existing representation and should be allowed sufficient time to do so within reasonable and practicable limits. And obviously the panel will hear from all three interested parties in due course. In determining the application with a view to promoting the licensing objectives, the overall interest of the local community, the licensing authority must give appropriate weight to the steps that are appropriate to promote the licensing objectives, representations including supporting information presented by all the parties, the guidance issued under Section 182 of the Licensing Act, and the authority's own statement of licensing policy. And the guidance states that licensing authorities are best placed to determine what actions are appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives in their areas, and all licensing determinations should be considered on a case-by-case basis. They should take account of any representations or objections that have been received from responsible authorities or other persons, and representations made by the applicant or premises user, as the case may be. And the authority's determination should be evidence-based, justified as being appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives, and proportionate to what is intended to achieve. I don't feel the need to go through the other options and the financial implications. I will, however, draw the panel's attention to the various background papers. Appendix 1 is the application form in full from the applicant, where the applicant details what is the variation that is proposed and the reasons behind it. To assist the panel, I have also added the current plan of the premises. That doesn't form part of the variation application. There's no request to change the plan. However, it will give the panel an idea of the layout of the premises, as it may well be that the panel haven't visited the particular location. Appendix 2 is further details from the applicant, Mr. Falk, in response to the representations which you've received. You'll see that it is quite comprehensive and details the social club's response to the representations, and also gives details of how they have been dealing with noise complaints since the inception of the initial licence. Appendix 3, as I stated earlier, are the full current licence conditions which were imposed after a hearing by this licensing committee, and the one which is highlighted at number 5 is the part of the variation, which is to extend the use of the outside or balcony areas to 2200 hours. Appendix 4, there is an aerial view of the club, which is marked on the aerial view at actually Zansdye Football Club. It will give the panel some context to the location of the club and the location of the where the interested parties are referring to when they give their representations. Appendix 5 are a selection of photographs of the premises. First one's the front view of the building, which is a front view taken from the car park. Obviously, we then have the rear of the building, which shows the balcony. There are then two side views of the rear area, also showing the balcony. There's a photograph of the ground floor area, and then a view of the balcony from the top of the stairs. And the last three photographs are alternate views across the balcony, and the final one is the view from the end of the balcony towards the houses which are situated on the Cookfield Road. At Appendix 6, we have the full representation from Emma Sparham, which the panel have had and been able to read and look at. At Appendix 7, we've got the representation from Karen Sedgwick-Smith. And at Appendix 8, we have full representation from Joanna Stedman. And unless I can assist the committee any further, that is the report before yourselves at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed, John. And once again, I apologise for calling you Councillor John Bride the other day. I'm a fairly new chairman. Let me take you through what we're going to do, so that everybody's quite clear. We want to get this right. First of all, John's given an outline of the entire agenda. We're going to invite the applicant to direct any questions to John, first of all. Then we're going to invite the interested parties, if they would like, in turn, to actually ask John some questions. And then indeed I shall ask the panel members if they'd like to ask him some questions. That's the first part of our meeting. Then I'm going to invite John Thorpe with Mr. Herbert to actually make his representation first about what they actually want to do. And then I shall actually ask you guys if you want to ask any questions of the senior licensing officer as well, and I shall do that in turn as well. I shall also invite the senior licensing officer to direct questions to anyone that he wishes to do that to as well. After having made your representation, I shall then ask each of you individually to make your representations, if you will, and then we shall go to John Thorpe to sum up. Sorry, to sum up, and then we shall ask anybody. The panel will ask any questions of anybody that they wish from the statements that have been made, if that's okay. And then we shall leave the chamber to think things over and come back with a decision. Is everybody happy about that? Incidentally, when you actually want to speak, these things you have to press the right-hand button, okay? So you'll find that your interested party application thing or your applicant thing will come up on there to say who it is that's speaking. So without further ado, I would invite the applicant, if you have any questions of the senior licensing officer, to come through. No, you're happy with that, okay. So then, the interested parties, can I start with Emma, if you have any questions for John? You're quite happy. And please forgive me. Ms. Sparham, if you have any questions. For any questions, no? And finally, have you any questions for John?
Joe Stedman, no, I have
You're
no
absolutely
questions.
fine. Okay, thank you. And so I'm going to invite the applicant, John Thorpe, to make his representation.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask Phil Herbert to actually introduce the representations, if that's okay, and I'll deal with questions later. I would just say that Mr. Thorpe would normally deal with this, but he's literally just arrived back from holiday, so he hasn't got the papers or anything else, so I've stepped in. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't intend to repeat what we put in the application or Mr Thorpe's very full reply to the representations. I do want to make it very, very clear that we at Anstey Sports and Social Club take our obligations to the village and the residents, but particularly also to the neighbours, very, very seriously. You will have seen in the papers that we have put in place a robust noise management plan. That noise management plan is constantly evolving. John is in regular contact with Mr Bryant as the SLO, and also has been in contact with the environmental protection team to refine that noise management plan. We are learning as we're going on. When the original licensing application, we actually landed in the middle of the whole COVID situation restrictions. We were having to have windows open, doors open, nobody standing up, table service only. The application got off to a slight false start in that there was, because it was a remote application, there was a bit of confusion with the committee as to the status of the balcony and whether it was a fire escape. A quick minor amendment was made whereby after about 2 months we got that sorted. So for the first couple of months we couldn't use the balcony at all because the COVID regs meant that you had to be seated to have a drink. We weren't allowed under the then rules any chairs or tables on that balcony. But once we explained that there is a delineated escape route on that, which is now marked with a white line, it was understood that the balcony was there for the benefit of people watching cricket, watching other sports on the recreation ground. It is very, very important when looking at this application to distinguish between the two amendments that we are seeking. One being the balcony and outdoor space, which we are seeking moves from 9 p.m. till 10 p.m. and the other from the music request, the amplified music request, which will be extended to midnight on 12 occasions per year. I said that we thought a lot about this when we made the original application. MSDC's policy is that 11 p.m. is a starting point for outdoor events, beer gardens, etc., etc. We didn't put that in our application. We thought that would be unfair on neighbours, and we actually went for a 10 p.m. application. That's what we applied for originally. And having, well, benefit now of 15 months, we're even more certain of that being the sort of correct sort of time for us without going for further time, but at the same time, what, as a clubhouse for our members and visitors, would be beneficial for them. Just as an update, since this application was made, there have been a number of events at the club. Ansar Rangers Football Club also play at the recreation ground. They had a football fundraising casino night up there. We had a TENS licence to allow the balcony, an outdoor area, to be used up until 10 o'clock. And we had music until midnight through the AV system. There was no DJ, it was just through the speakers at the system. That was on the 4th of June. There were no complaints received from anybody on our WhatsApp group via the noise management plan or anything at all. On the 11th of June, there was a 50th birthday party up there. Now that did have a DJ. Again, this was covered by a TENS application, balcony access to 10 p.m. and music till late. We briefed the DJ on our noise management plan. We performed sound checks, monitored those sound levels. 11th of June, 10 o'clock on the balcony, midnight music, no complaints. You will see probably from the replies and what's gone on in the last year that there was a band called the Band of Dads who had played back in January, which was probably the major concern during the year of loud music. They played as part of the Cookfield Music Festival on the 17th of June. This wasn't something that we as the sports club had arranged. This was via the Village Hall. The Village Hall is downstairs in the building at Anstey, but we provide the bar services upstairs, etc. Again, we worked with the festival organisers, taught them through the noise management plan, and that went ahead, and again, no complaints received. One other thing I was thinking about as we looked at what's going on here, particularly this is in relation to the balcony and outside area, was just last Tuesday, I was up there for a midweek game. They have midweek 20 20 over games, and ironically, it was against MSDC's cricket team. I've got 3 sons, they were playing in that game. Watching that game, the game finished at 20:49 hours. So the people sitting on the balcony watching the game, there were about 12, 15 people sitting on the balcony. By that stage, they'd had a 8:30 warning that they had to get off the balcony in half an hour. They'd had a 8:45 warning that they had to get off the balcony by 9 o'clock. The game actually finished, as I said, at 20:49 hours. Players came off the pitch. The Anstey players then go back on the pitch to collect up the boundary rope, to put on the ropes around the pitches and square and tidy up, put everything away. Downstairs, the ladies from the social club that was a fundraising had put on a barbecue to feed the players. By the time everybody was in and done, they literally had to take their burger off the barbecue and get inside, because our licence says we finish at 9. It was at 9:04 by the time we'd got people coming through to collect their food off the barbecue. Now, you could say, oh, start your match earlier, etc., etc. That was a 6 o'clock start. People from work play a fun game in the evening. It was 22 degrees. It was bright sunshine. It was a lovely evening out there. But under our current licence, you cannot sit on the balcony, enjoy a drink after cricket, or be downstairs to do that. Now, we appreciate that it is a balancing act between what users from the village and the cricket club want from their club. There's no pub in Anstey anymore. It is basically the village hall and social club and the petrol station. That is all it is at Anstey now. And we think via the noise management plan, the WhatsApp group that we instigated and give access to the neighbours on, that we have put in place steps to address concerns. As I said, we are learning. There has been the odd mistake, but just, as I said, I've tried to show just 3 events since that application was made, and there haven't been issues. When this application was first made, there were a number of representations made. There was talk of crime disorder, bottles being used as weapons, injuries to children, requests for bouncers and security guards, things being thrown off the balcony. So public safety, crime disorder, protection of children was all put in there. None of that has come to fruition. As I said, there are isolated incidents of noise. We have tried to manage that and change our policies to get there, and we believe we've addressed that. And we would ask that the application for 10 o'clock, which we don't think is unreasonable, is agreed. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Herbert. Now, I realised straight away that I've actually missed one thing. I should have asked the panel members if they wanted to ask the licensing officer any questions. No, you're happy with that? Okay. So I'm going to invite the licensing officer if he would like to ask Mr. Herbert, Ms. Thorpe, any questions.
No, Chair, I don't have any questions.
Bless you, thank you. So then we move to invite the interested parties. Emma Sparham, Karen Sedgwick-Smith and Joanna Stedman. In that order, please, if you would like to indicate if you'd like to ask any questions of the applicant.
No questions.
You're happy with that? Any questions? Karen?
No, thank you.
No? And Jo?
Yeah, I have a few. Picking up on your last comment first, I'm sorry, I don't know what Phil, I think it was. Phil wasn't at the Zoom meeting, so comments about children being abused with bottles and things are not how the conversation went. So that was slightly misleading in terms of what you're saying. I've got a couple of questions about the representations that has been made. Paragraph 5 of the background report says Anstey Sports and Social Club has previously operated on the site. It hasn't. This is a new building. They operated from a fully enclosed single-storey hut, which you can identify on the plans because it actually says Anstey Football Club on the Appendix 4. So there was no outdoor space. The only outdoor space was people went outside and had a beer after a match, sat on the grass, watched their kids playing, then went home again. There was no outdoor space for sitting. There was certainly no first floor level space going on. I'm interested to know how many members of the adult members of the club there are at present, please. How many adult members?
Presently
That's right.
about 350.
About
Adults,
350 adult members.
not
you happy with
families,
that answer?
adults. Yeah, okay. And I'm also interested, there was you say about the fire escape staircase and the balcony. There is a fire escape across the balcony, which maybe delayed you. Could you tell me when the white line was put down, given the licensing was done in April last year? When was the white line posted?
Just thought.
The white line was actually put down in a fixed way very recently. One of the reasons for that was that we were going through a period with the contractors around the building and clearing snags, including which had the floor of the balcony to be taken up to repair a leak. And it was only until we'd actually really achieved that and actually got all the balcony tiles back in place that it was actually appropriate to draw a firm white line. I would also add that we took all the furniture off the balcony in October and put it back on the balcony in May. So the balcony's clear through the winter months. People aren't going to sit out there, are they? But that was the reason for the delay in actually getting the fixed white line in place.
Are you happy with that, Chair? Would you like to ask any more questions?
I've got a couple more.
Okay.
So it's a private members club, as I understand it. So I'm just intrigued as to how you can have so many birthday parties and board events for the music festival for a private members club. Isn't it just the members? Could somebody explain how that works on licensing?
As we got a premises licence rather than previously we had sorry, I might have to ask John to confirm what the precise title of the licence was. It was a club premises certificate, was that correct?
Yes, to clarify, the previous permission which the club had was a club premises certificate. That's very restrictive. It only allowed club members or their signed-in guests to actually be supplied alcohol within the club premises. The new premises has a premises licence, which although the premises is being run by the social club, the premises licence allows alcohol to be supplied to anyone. It's not restricted to just members of the club. So the differences between a club premises certificate, it can only supply to members and their guests. Premises licence, it can be supplied to anyone. So if you think of it like a pub has a premises licence and can serve to anyone who comes along, whereas a club premises certificate, it's very restrictive as to the number of people who can be served. Premises licence therefore gives the club the flexibility to be able to hold other events within the club premises because it's not just for club members.
Thank you, John. Joanna, have you got any more questions?
Yeah, my only final point is that the reaction, it's fine having reactions and how they've responded to queries. It's exhausting constantly having to respond and nag people about noise disturbance when you're sitting in your garden or you want to go to bed and you can't have the doors open because they've got a
Joe, can I stop you there, please? This is questions. Oh, sorry. You've got
No, but it is still questions.
You will be able to make your representation in a minute, I promise you.
Okay, but we're going on, but they're not meant to be doing these things. I thought that was the whole rule. They weren't meant to be on the balcony at 9 o'clock. So why are we having to, why are you on the balcony at 9 o'clock when you're not meant to be on the balcony at 9 o'clock? What is the justification? The rules say you're not on the balcony at 9 o'clock or after 9 o'clock. And
As
yet,
I understand it, they are allowed to use the balcony until 9 o'clock.
yeah, but after 9 o'clock, they're not.
Yes.
So why are they on the balcony after 9 o'clock?
That's fine. That's
Yeah,
fine.
if that's what the rules are,
Okay,
why?
John.
Yes, perhaps I can clarify for Joanna's benefit. The balcony under the premises licence can only be used, and outside areas can only be used till 9 o'clock in the evening, that's correct. However, the club and anyone else can obtain what's called a temporary event notice, which is a temporary permission to hold licensable activities in an area which isn't licensed. So if the club gets a temporary event notice to use the balcony and outside areas till 10 o'clock, then those areas are being used under the authority of the temporary event notice and not under the authority of the premises licence. You can obtain up to, currently, 20 temporary event notices a year.
Thank you very much indeed for that, John. Okay, any more questions?
No.
Thank you so much, that's very good. Ms Hill, you wanted to respond to the questions that were asked over here.
Just, I was actually going to say something similar to Mr Bryant has just said in relation to those TENS notices allowing people out there post 9 o'clock. I would say it is now 15 months since this application was originally made and it's been operating. That's somewhere in the region of 450 days. There have been 2 instances of people being on the balcony post 9 o'clock, one at just after 9 o'clock, 10 past 9, and one group of ladies at 9:30 that had got out the door and the barman had missed them going out there. That's the only time it's happened. We've put steps in to change that and signage, etc., and hope it doesn't happen again.
Thank you very much indeed. Panel members, questions? Please feel free to ask anybody and everything.
Are they not going to make a statement first?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Are the interested parties not going to make a statement now?
They are, but you can actually ask questions of the interested parties from the questions that have come up. No? You'll leave it till later?
Well, I do have some questions here. Has the balcony got any lighting on it?
No, only safety lighting
Okay, so
for Forest Gate.
there's no facility, there's no lighting on there at 9, 10 o'clock. So it would be dark in certain times of the year at that time of night, yes?
And that's the intention, to keep it that way.
Okay. I must confess I was a licensee myself, so I do sort of understand what goes on. And as the evening progresses, people obviously drink more and perhaps get a little bit more intoxicated. So what will you do? I'm sort of to negate, you know, as people get to, if we go to 10 o'clock, people getting, you know, drunker and making more and more noise. Because I do know it happens. I have been a licensee myself, so I'd be interested to see what your mitigation for that would be.
So, well, first of all, I would say it's a members' club, so people who go there regularly. They understand their obligations, so it is easy. It's easy to remind them of their obligations in that circumstances. As Phil pointed out, we try, certainly in terms of. Joe said it, you know, it's exhausting. I can understand that. It's exhausting trying to manage to a 9 o'clock curfew as well, because we're having to stay on top of that and remind people. Well, that's how we do it. We seek to tell them at 8:30 you're going to have to move out of off the balcony area, and remind them, and you know, might have to enforce that at 9 o'clock, where the bar staff have to go out and just basically drag the people back into the bar. In terms of intoxication, whether it's the balcony or not, we have obligations full stop in terms of whether people start to drink too much or getting rowdy. We have an obligation to manage that risk, whether that's on the balcony or in the club room itself, and you know, would stop serving people or ask them to be taken home if that is necessary. It isn't, by and large, but that's how we would deal with that.
Thank you for that. I'm going to come to the representations in a second, but are there any more questions
Not at the
as
moment,
far as we've
Chairman.
gone? Yeah.
I have a question for the applicant.
Councillor Cornish.
Thank you. So I was really interested to see the correspondence between residents and the club, and I think just in consideration of the interested parties in terms of the kind of tiresome efforts to kind of contact you when there are certain events going on. I just wondered how that could be addressed in advance. So would there be capacity, and I'm talking about the amplified music now in terms of 12 days a year, would there be capacity to communicate those events, say, at least 4 weeks in advance, so that residents are aware of events coming up?
So, on the 2 occasions that we've the Band of Dads have played, which has been the live music. It's the only time we've actually had live music. We have communicated in advance, albeit not 4 weeks in advance. So we did communicate in advance on the October. And that was in part because we, rightly or wrongly, we had an understanding that because of the COVID situation that we had to leave the doors ajar and create some air circulation. And as I've said in my response to the representations, we had subsequent meetings with the SLO where we might not have got the right end of the stick on that advice, actually. We also, the Band of Dads played in January of this year, and there was extensive engagement, as you can see, on the WhatsApp group through that. We did, again, alert the group, I believe, in advance to say that was going to happen. I think in terms of standing back from that, in terms of the noise management plan, I think we would want to give assurance that there'll be a limited number of these, that in the light of the experience of January, we are now, and consultations with Mid Sussex, whether it's the SLO or the environmental team, that we're now putting in place a plan. One of the lessons for me from the January, I wasn't there in January, I had COVID, so I wasn't on site, but the views about what is noise or sound, when sound becomes noise, is subjective, depending on whether you're enjoying the event or whether you're just having to suffer the noise. We've now instigated a programme of testing, so there are specific limits set in the lease, and we're working to that now. So how do we achieve compliance? So we want to restrict the number of events, and that we said anything up to a dozen, but I think it would, in actual fact, in practice, be much less than that, as I've said in my representation. But also to manage those events strictly within those parameters. So we have something that's objective that requires measurement of the sound. We're still working at that, but we did operate one of our members had a 50th birthday party in the hall the last month. As Mr. Herbert pointed out, we did brief them and say these are the provisions within the plan. We asked them to do a sound check, and they took sound checks throughout the evening in the hall, in the club room, and outside the building to make sure that we were not breaching that parameter. We also, one of the lessons from the January event is that we allowed the loud, incorrectly, I think in retrospect, we allowed the live music to go on beyond 11. We will not do that again. And equally, we will make sure that DJs, who, even if they're sort of playing on in that evening, actually respect those, the provisions, and we have a proper cooling down period. So in terms of, there are lower decibel levels that have got to be achieved, the thresholds after 11 o'clock, and we will make sure those are achieved.
Can I just come back on that?
Of course you
Chair?
can.
Thank you. I just think I obviously commend the communication. There seems to be a lot of communication going on between residents. I just think I'm just trying to put myself in the space of a resident for me to know that something's going on in 3 weeks' time or 2 weeks' time is very different to then having to respond to something without knowing about it. So I just wondered if, is there capacity to I know you say there might be less than 12, but for the purposes of this, we're considering an application for up to 12. So let's take it on that basis for now. Is there capacity to give residents notice of that amplified music event in relation to this application?
Absolutely, but I would add that the centre advertises these events as well in advance, so certainly 4 weeks in advance. Most events are known, those are picked up on the Anstey Hub, so these are widely promulgated, so it shouldn't necessarily be a surprise.
Okay.
Thank you. Before any other panel member questions or anything, Senior Licensing Officer, John, do you want to ask any questions at this stage? You're happy? Okay, thank you. I'm going to invite Emma now to make her statement, and then I should invite the Licensing Officer to ask you some questions, and indeed we shall run through the other parties. Okay, off you go.
Thank you. Firstly, I hope the following points that I'm going to make are clear, because I really only had last night to prepare. There seemed to be a mix-up with the documentation, so that was my nighttime reading and making notes from that. So I know Mr. Bryant's gone through my representation earlier, and it's really just to reiterate the points that subcommittee made last year, which we were really quite happy with when they made the decision of the 9 p.m. Noise does travel. It was really most apparent. Yes, we live on a main road, but it was most apparent during lockdown. I mean, it was amazing, the silence. So during the evenings when the road traffic does die down, you can hear everything. The village centre is surrounded by houses, mainly with children and families. There's a new family just next door to me, number 2 Rock Cottages, who've got 2 very small children. And also, if you look at the layout of the houses, the main bedrooms are at the back, which are facing the village hall. Summer months, we had a heat wave not so long ago. You need the windows open. And again, I feel with the noise that we have experienced and we could potentially experience in the future, that could restrict us to making that decision of whether to keep the noise, the windows opened or closed. And I'm sure my neighbours will feel the same. I mean, these 3 factors that were brought up and helped to make that decision of 9 p.m. haven't changed. That this still remains there today. Also, with regards to the complaints from ourselves during the past year, yes, some of them haven't been specifically about noise from the balcony, but at the end of the day, noise is noise. And when a disturbance arises and they're dealt with, but it's always after the event, we and our families have been disturbed. With regards to the comparison with East Grinstead Sports Club, I really would urge you to dismiss that. It's a totally different location. It's not surrounded by houses in such close proximity as we are. Also, in the last meeting, which was only a year ago, the request for the importance of all parties to communicate was encouraged. Yes, we have the WhatsApp group and it is working, and even just the other day my neighbour alerted Mr. Thorpe of the alarm going off because there were intruders. So, it is working. But what really concerns me even more is that we only find out about important plans such as these with regards to the licensing hours, or another example is changes to the car park, is when the notice is nailed onto a lamppost on the entrance of the car park. That's not really a good example of effective relationships with the local community. So really my hope going forward is there a more collaborative approach and better information sharing, so we don't find ourselves in this situation year upon year, and we don't find about proposed changes by chance. The last thing I really want to mention, which came up, is about the WhatsApp group. Yes, it's been set up, but you can see who's actually here today. We are the only members of that WhatsApp group because it hasn't been advertised to the whole village or even to the houses which surround the centre. So you might find the 3 of us here today raising our concerns. There might be more out there because they haven't been party to the WhatsApp group, or they haven't seen the notice on a lamppost at the car park entrance. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Emma. John, would you like to ask any questions for Emma?
No, thank you, Chair. I think Emma has detailed her representation both verbally and in writing.
Okay. And I'm going to ask the panel if they'd like to ask any questions about it.
No further questions.
Not at this stage, no.
Are you impacted by any, like the sports events that go on there, the cricket and the football? Is there loud noise with that?
Yeah, we can hear everything, whether our windows are opened or whether we're in the garden. I mean, it is a very open area. The traffic noise does deaden it. There's, a bit of a, balancing situation. But if it goes on after, the peak hours of traffic, yes, we hear, people outside, they might be cheering, they might be shouting, or even people in the car park and slamming of doors. Late at night, we see the headlights from cars going through into my garden. So, yeah.
Do you live in Deeks Lane, do you, or in?
No, I live on Cookfield Road.
Road,
I'm
okay.
on Rock Cottages. So you open my back gate and there's the village centre with the cricket ground and hence the football pitch at the end.
Thank you, Emma. I'm going to move to Where are we? Karen, for you to make your representation, please.
Yes, I haven't got a great deal to add to what I've already said before in my statement, but it has made a difference with the relocating of the club because it was that much further away. The noise has become much more clear, and you can actually hear specific conversations, you can hear the music, and I don't fully understand why the windows and the doors aren't kept shut to contain the noise. Obviously, if they're out on the balcony, I don't think we can do much about that. So I think the 9 o'clock curfew is pretty good with regard to that because noise travels tremendously. But when we specifically asked about the windows being open, they said there was no air conditioning, which it's a new building and the soundproofing must be rubbish because, you know, I don't know, 200 foot away, but you can hear everything until it finishes. But that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Karen. John, would you like to ask any questions? Okay, thank you. Panel, would you like to ask any questions?
It's really for the applicants, really, in relation to what the lady's just said. Can the, I think there's glass doors, aren't there, onto the balcony, is that right? Have I got that right? Can they be closed all the time? So if you need to go out the balcony, you need to open the door and go through?
Yes, they can be closed, and they certainly should be closed at any time we're playing music in the club room. That's the requirement.
So there is a potential to do that?
It's in the license and conditions.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, just to confirm for the panel, on your Appendix 3, which details the licensing conditions, condition number 9 is that all external doors and windows, which would include the balcony, must be kept closed after 2100 hours other than for access and egress or in an emergency. So even if the panel were minded to agree the variation, the doors to the balcony would still have to be kept closed after 2100 hours to comply with that condition.
Thank you very much for that, John. Okay, and finally, go to Joe.
Right. Just to reiterate really what everybody else has said, I mean, we knew when we bought our house that we backed onto a cricket pitch. And actually during the daytime, listening to the cricket is quite pleasant, you know, and yes, it does go on all weekend through the summer months constantly. So we have that noise, but it's not unpleasant noise. There's other associated factors that go with it, such as traffic movements that aren't quite so amenable. But the actual listening to the kids playing cricket is actually, I quite enjoy it. My kids used to play cricket there. It's not something I object to, but it goes on all day and then into the night. And as I said, or alluded to earlier, I'm actually quite exhausted by going through this constantly. What's the point in constantly? We started off making a note of when the noise was and making an objection to it, alerting John to it. But after a while, you just think, they're going to do it again. It just carries on. It still makes a disturbance. It's still ongoing, and it doesn't stop. And then it's quite disheartening, actually, to hear. I thought it used to be a private members club. We supported the building of the village hall. Everybody thought, oh, that's a nice idea. You know, a village hall for the residents and an ancillary bit for the cricket club to enjoy a pint after their matches. Lovely, how quaint and how very Sussex. But actually, it's kind of, it seems like the aspirations of the club are to be part of the Oval, and it grows and grows and grows, and they push and push and push. And we can't sit in the back garden of a summer, lovely sunny summer. It would be nice to have a barbecue quietly in the back garden when the traffic dies down at the front and we get to enjoy the quiet that we haven't had all day because kids have been playing or the men have been playing or whatever. We just wanted a bit of time to be able to sit and enjoy our gardens quietly without somebody making huge noise or huge music. There is a disturbance. We don't have any it sounds hugely overdramatic and hugely like, oh, but we don't get any respite from it at all during the summer, from April to late October, I would say. Probably earlier, but if they can push it back to late October because of the weather, that will happen. And then we go through this process. We thought it was a members club. It's not a members club. We didn't want a pub. It now seems it's effectively a pub. Anybody can come in. And then we say we'd like it till 9 o'clock, but you can get round 9 o'clock till 10 o'clock or 12 o'clock because you have a separate license. At the end of the day, you kind of think, why are we bothering going through this process? And again, and the idea, if you're going to do it every year, it's going to be, well, I think it'll probably finish me off. But it does cause disturbance, regardless of what conclusion you come to. You know, you can hear every word from the balcony when they're talking, or you know, the people aren't doing it on purpose to be loud or obnoxious, or you know, they're completely in their own little world, having a nice time, having a beer and a chat. But I don't really want to hear what they're talking about. It's, you know, and I actually, why should I? To be fair, when the doors are shut, it's a lot quieter. It doesn't make the music you can't hear, in my opinion. We're on the field side of it, so the balcony is pretty much in line with my back garden. So when they're low down in the field, the noise doesn't carry. But when they're upstairs, and you know, they probably haven't got a clue because they've never stood in my back garden and listened to the conversations going on. But it does carry, and it is noisy, and it is disturbing. And, you know, honestly, I would not waste my time and energy going through this time and time again if it didn't have an impact. So, you know, thank you for the opportunity to talk and get it out of my system. That's genuinely my bugbear about it.
Thank you, Jo. I'm going to ask the licence officer if she's got any questions first.
No, again, like the other interested parties, I think Joanne's been very eloquent in making her points.
Thank you. Yeah, a question for myself. Bearing in mind that this is only an hour balcony difference, is it going to be that much? This is for all my panels, so that we can actually hear what you have to say about that.
Yes, it would. It would be the time between me having a bit of respite from the kids going to bed, sitting down and being able to have a quiet glass of wine and not go, oh, great. You know, it's not just an hour. We kind of conceded to 9 o'clock being outside. Ideally, you know, it would be nice if it was back to where it was originally and they were all inside and weren't outside. But I completely get it's a beautiful view from, well, I've been on the balcony. I assume it's a beautiful view from looking out over the balcony, watching cricket if that's your thing. But it's not everybody's thing. And they are only visitors to our village. They're not, it's not as if the whole village is in there having a nice time at the same time. It's people coming from possibly the Anstey Club aren't all, it's only a small village, there's that many. I don't know how many players, I'd speculate by not very many people that play on Anstey Cricket Club actually come from Anstey. But that would be my summation of seeing people play. So it's visitors coming to our lovely village, enjoying our lovely area, and enjoying a sport that they want. Fantastic. I mean, getting some exercise, brilliant. But it's to the people that actually live there's detriment that they can't enjoy their own environment with it going on. So, yes, an extra hour would be
Make a difference. Thanks, Jo.
another exhausting hour.
Okay. Emma, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair question to ask Jo about that extra hour, but I could turn it back onto this request and said, what does that extra hour mean and do for a club? I mean, you yourself have said about you've had experience, you know, being a licensing person, and if somebody's drinking outside and they want to continue drinking, they can move inside and continue drinking, you know? And yes, I just feel it's more of a detriment to the residents with the children, that extra hour. And it is late, you know, we've got families who are studying for exam, we've got babies, you know, I've got a teenage girl who, trust me, needs her sleep. So I feel it's more of a detriment for families and children, that extra hour, than for somebody having a drink who could always continue their enjoyment inside.
Exactly, yes, we will come to that. Because I'm going to invite the panel now to ask any questions that they would like to ask. John, are you happy with the things so far?
Certainly, Chair. You may wish to invite the applicant to ask any
course,
questions
to
of
sum
the
up.
interested parties, but I'm quite happy.
Okay. Personally, I hope you are both listening to each other. That's the important thing as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to invite the applicant to sum up, and hopefully will include some of those things we've been talking about. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair. I might ask if in the light of my comments, if Phil's got any further points that he wants to make to come in at the end, if that's okay. But just, I'd like to reiterate that we are committed to getting this right. And as Phil said at the start in the application, we actually do think there are two issues here. One is around the balcony, and the one is around amplified music, and there are two different responses to that. I would like to point the panel back to my letter to John in response to the representations made. And I said, why are we here now? It's a year on, and we've now got experience. We now know a little bit more about how to operate the building and to operate the club. We now and manage the membership, as it were. We've also got evidence of actual complaints, and there are only 2 noise complaints submitted in that period. I haven't had any complaints at all since January, through any avenue, any media. The 2 complaints about the people being on the balcony, it wasn't made expressly clear that it was noise. One of them we'd spotted and we were dealing with, so our procedures had caught that. The second occasion we didn't know about, and frankly, the senior licence officer pointed that out to me the following day. She reported it to me, and we investigated it, and we accept there were people out on the balcony at that time, and we took steps to do with that. We have had none since. In terms of noise, in terms of the club room, I think you probably draw a distinction between, there are 2 entities using this building. There's the Anstey Sports Club, in effect, which is what I'm a representative of, and effectively that is the entity that holds the licence, but there's also the Village Hall. The Anstey Sports Club, for events that it is operated, has had 2 complaints. And from what I can see, one of them I wasn't aware of. I didn't know about it, and I've only found out through these representations that a complaint existed. And then there was the January 22 case, which frankly was an important event. We learnt a lot that night, and that has now shaped our thinking. So that will not be repeated, I can assure you. In the infancy of running the club, the Village Hall can also be booked for events, and because we had a licence for the whole building, we did, on 2 or 3 occasions, provide bars to those events. We now only do that in exceptional circumstances. So the recent example where the Cuckfield Festival came to us and said they didn't want a bar, then they said, actually, would you run the bar? Then we said, well, okay, we will, but we actually said, you're doing it under the auspices of this licence now, so you must comply with the licence conditions. And we wrote to them to say, this is what the lease requires, this is what the licence requires, this is what our noise management plan requires. It was a particularly hot day, and we were really concerned about the windows being open that day, even though it was, in a sense, it wasn't our booking, but we had some responsibility, and we took steps with them to make sure that room was cooled, the windows were closed. The cooling actually works when the windows are closed. If you open them up, it defeats the object. So that's a point of learning. Again, just coming back to last summer, we did a few events where we supported party bookings downstairs in the Village Hall. We have stopped doing that, partly because we now don't have a premises manager, so we don't have the capability to support that. But also that we'd had, we were being drawn into instances where people were actually playing music loud, and it had come through the group that we needed to deal with that, and we were in the process of dealing with that. And we also, had instances where we just felt we didn't really want to directly manage or encourage the sale of provision of alcohol in the village hall, certainly on our part. So we stepped back from that altogether. We don't do it. So all the events that we're talking about principally relate to the events that we will deliver in the club room for our members, or our members' guests. What I would encourage the panel to look at is the evidence, the actual examples of where in the first year of this licence we've encountered problems. And I'm not saying there haven't been issues, but I do believe that in the light of that evidence and the actual facts, it gives a better basis to actually look at what is an appropriate basis for actually setting the licence parameters rather than assertions around things that have not been borne out, in my view. Just a final point on the WhatsApp group. I'm the only member of the club on the WhatsApp group because I don't control the WhatsApp group. There are other members other than the people here today who are on the WhatsApp group. And we have had, when we had a centre manager, he was on the WhatsApp group, but he's gone. We have tried, I'm not trying to make a point here, but there are other people in the club who would willingly go on the WhatsApp group, but we don't administer it. Mm-hmm. We're quite happy in terms of the administration of the group for that to be thrown out as wide as it can be, certainly. So I think the final point really is around the noise management plan, which is something that we did do in the light of the experience of January. We realised we had to deal with this. We called a meeting of the Alcohol Committee on the Monday night after the Saturday. It was a Friday event, I beg your pardon. We called a meeting, and then we immediately got in touch with Mid-Sussex to say we really need to look at this and work this through. It's still in draft. It is evolving. That's partly because one of the things we want to introduce to that plan is really some kind of objective measurement and assessment of noise, and to be managing to that, including in compliance with the licence and making sure that the lease requirements are in fact met. On the balcony, my final point is, and I think I draw the panel's attention to what Phil said about the experience this week. On a summer night, closing the balcony at 9 o'clock is utterly anomalous. We said that in our application. It made no sense. We cannot close activities down on the recreation ground by 9 o'clock. It's impossible to do. And we, representations have said that it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting trying to police and manage the balcony under the existing licence requirement. We do believe that the original application of 10 o'clock, which was supported by officials, I believe, is the realistic sort of cut-off point. We absolutely understand the point about, we're trying to strike a balance here. We don't want to go for 11. We never did want to go for 11, but we do think 9 o'clock is we think we're unique in Mid-Sussex in actually having to meet that requirement. Just a final point on membership and ANSTI. The Sports and Social Club has always had members from Haywards Heath, from Burgess Hill. That is known. I was involved in the development of the business plan, and it wasn't a very clever one, in 2013, which started off the project for the building of this. A fundamental requirement for securing Mid-Sussex support was to demonstrate that the membership was not simply from ANSTI, but it was a Mid-Sussex membership. That people would go there for recreation, healthy recreation, from Haywards Heath, from Burgess Hill, from Cuckfield, and from Bolney. So we are trying to promote our ANSTI membership. We give preferential rates of membership rates to ANSTI residents, and we want, we'd like to increase that if we could, and we're trying. But it's never been exclusively an ANSTI club. That's my final point. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think on the points that you've made, I'm sure that will be some reassurance on some of the things that have been said. And you've answered my question, which I asked the ladies as well. Does the extra hour make a difference? And you're saying that it actually does. Okay. Panel members, would you like to ask some questions? Oh, sorry, Mr Herman. I'm terribly
just-
sorry.
just
I'll
very
get
quick-
used to this eventually.
Very quickly, just picking up a couple of points. Councillor Cornish's point in relation to notification of events in advance. They were both notified in advance on WhatsApp, but I totally appreciate the point you're making about a longer notification to get people, if they want to go out or do something different, etc. I'm not suggesting they have to go out, but just so they know something is coming. Just picking up on Mrs Stedman's point that she's constantly complaining and doing X, Y and Z, it's not borne out by the WhatsApp group. If you look at the WhatsApp group, there are 2 events on there that Mrs Stedman has complained about, plus her email to Mr Bryant. That's in 15 months of operating. The incident log, which is attached to Mr Thorpe's response, sets all that out. I believe Mrs Stedman's children are around the ages of 14 and 16. Mrs Sparham's daughter, I believe, is in the region of 13. There are other neighbours. There's around 12 houses around the sports ground. There's one other neighbour who got in touch with us, nothing to do with the events or anything like that, but in relation to the sound of the aircon when we first got going. We worked on ways to mitigate that, and that was resolved. So other neighbours do use the club, do speak to us. It's a case of not knowing where to go to. If they want to come on a WhatsApp group, they're more than welcome. We welcome engagement with our neighbours. And just on that point, given those other households, yes, there are 3 interested parties here, but they can't speak on behalf of other neighbours to that extent, and I would ask you to take their views on what it is, but then there again look at the rest of the village we have and the facility we're trying to provide for those neighbours, for those residents. As John said, I mean, one of the parts of getting the funding was to open this space up to be used as an event space for people in the wider area. The number of late night events, no more than 12 a year, is fairly limited, and we don't get anywhere near that at the moment. But it is vital to hold fundraising events for a small village sports club. We've got a fantastic facility there, but the heating, the insurance, the lighting, the cleaning, the cost of that is astronomical. Even when we try and do a lot through volunteers. A lot of stuff is done through volunteering. But to actually pay for that stuff and keep the building set up with all the requirements for CCTV, security lighting, etc., it is an expensive place to run. And without hiring out for some events and making it a place where people want to come and spend time, particularly on a summer's evening, that becomes very difficult. And I would just say that, obviously, by their very nature, these events would tend to be Friday, Saturday events as opposed to sort of midweek bits and pieces like that. One little point on East Grinstead, they've got the 11 o'clock licence onto their balcony from the cricket. I know the interested party have said, oh, it's not a comparison. There were complaints from the neighbours at East Grinstead at the time that they applied for that licence, and the licensing committee decided that, no, they would be allowed to have an 11 o'clock. We took that into consideration. We were looking and decided that we would only go for 10 o'clock. Apart from that, I don't think there's anything else I wish to add, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Herbert. And I would ask my panel members, colleagues, to make note of everything that's been said. There are a couple of questions. First of all, Councillor Knight.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't want to be doom and gloom, but the nights are drawing in. You know, it's going to be dark after 9 o'clock, and you have stated that there's never going to be any lighting on the balcony. So really, I'm just trying to understand, really you only need that balcony, because you wouldn't want people, in the dark, sort of being unmanaged and such. So you only really need that balcony after 9 o'clock in the summer months. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, through to October, I suppose it's 7. Yes, so, yeah, absolutely. The summer months, sometimes the footballers come back on a late afternoon in October and like to sit outside, but certainly as Phil said, by the end of October, and it's not, and it's nowhere near, they would go by about 6, I suppose. The other fact is it gets cold as well, so people won't want to sit outside.
Thank you. Councillor College.
Thank you, Yeah, can I just ask, is there any notices inside that ask people in the club to be aware of neighbours and to mind their noise on the exit or on the balcony? And if there aren't, can there be?
Yeah, there is signage. We are required by the licence to have signage, certainly on exiting. We can always refresh that because one of the things we find is that people don't read the signs. So that's part of our learning as well. But certainly in terms of reminding members through the members' code of conduct what their obligations are, reminding them when they go out onto the balcony, and we've had signage, even put temporary signage onto the tables as well, so that had little campaigns just to remind people of what their obligations are. But we do, as I say, there is still learning. So a point was made earlier about the car park. One of the things that we try to do, certainly with members, is tell people to get their taxis booked well in advance so they know when they're going to come. Don't leave it till 10:30 because you're not going to get one, or you're going to get it late. So we are acutely conscious of areas where we keep, and certainly when we have events which we're not actually leading ourselves, to remind the sponsors to say, look, please make sure that people have got their transport sorted because we don't want them hanging around in the car park.
Thank you. Panel, have you any more questions? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for all your representations. I'm going to ask Mr. Vickers to tell you exactly what's going to happen next.
Yeah, just please note that the panel members will now retire to consider their decision in relation to the application, obviously bearing in mind everything that's been put forward today, and I'll come back in due course.
Thank you, everybody. Can you, we should go away and deliberate. If you could remain here, and the officers will call you if anybody has to go out for a second or two or whatever, okay? We'll try not to be too long. Thank you. be cognizant and fair to everybody in this, and we wanted to make sure that we had got it right in our opinion, and it is just our humble opinion, okay? I'm going to announce the decision and the many words that we've put into what we've said. Please bear with me. After very careful consideration of all parties' representations, we have decided to grant the application subject to current licensing conditions at Appendix 3. We, however, Condition 5 is therefore amended to 2,200 hours. We recommend a continued monitoring of noise levels and would further recommend a wider engagement with local residents specifically. And we would further request the licensing officer's team to carry out random checks. We would ensure all parties know that any breach would mean that this would come back for further consideration and could lead to the whole thing being suspended. So as long as everybody's clear on that one. Thank you so much to everybody for coming along, giving of your time. We hope and pray that we have been fair to everybody on this. Thank you very much indeed.